Let's talk more about Joan Harmon with Court TV's Julia Janae, criminal defense attorney Sharon Lyko, and former federal prosecutor David Katz. I'll start with you, Julia Janae. You were the one that interviewed the defendant's mother. You've been in the courtroom every day so far. What is the impression right now to the jury about who Joan Harmon is and what maybe they don't know about her just yet?
They are hearing her name a lot. Pretty much every witness that has been on the stand has had to talk about Joan Harmon. They heard the opening statements that you just played from the defense laying it out. They also heard Matt Phillips say that he found that disc that said top secret, or the information that talked about the subpoena, inside the home of Joan Harmon because his parents were helping Joan Harmon with a house. That's what Diana Phillips also testified to, that she had some concern that her brother Calvin was helping Joan Harmon get a home. And then today we heard the investigating officer Scott Smith on the stand talking about the phone of the victim, Pamela Phillips, weeks after the murder, was located in her yard, and they figured it out because she took it to an AT&T store and tried to get it unlocked, and AT&T called the authorities.
Yeah, Sharon, you really hit the nail on the head the last block, just pointing the finger at Joan Harmon. How fortunate is this defense to have someone like this to point to, especially like Julia said, this suddenly appearing evidence of a disc, the dog tags. Joan Harmon would have access to these things that suddenly showed up after the police searched the crime scene, Sharon.
Yeah. That was the point I was going to make, is that she would have access to dog tags, very personal item, and she was his wife. And, think about her motivation financially. She already said she's going to take him down, and she knows how. Well, I would presume she had in mind the military court-martial, where she would get a bunch of money if it turned out a certain way. But she would have also stood to gain if there was an actual divorce. She would have gotten property, she may have gotten maintenance. But since there was no valid marriage, there doesn't need to be a divorce. So that's strike two against him. And that would have infuriated her to really frame Martin. But then you've got Mr. Phillips, who didn't do his part, again, in offering the kind of testimony that would have helped her. And it sounds like an act of just sheer rage and revenge. And I think too much focus is being played on Mr. Phillips' testimony. Who knows what he was going to testify to? What's the most he was going to be able to say? That he found these objects in the house. So there's a chain of custody connection, but nobody knows what his testimony was really going to be. She was the star witness. She was the one that brought the charges. She was the one that had the allegations lined up. And based on her allegations, the court-martial was underway.
Right, and David, just real quickly, we're almost running out of time, but David, did you notice how the defense attorney sort of brought up the bigamy without saying the word bigamy like the judge ruled that he could not?
Yeah, he did a skillful job in that regard. If this were a Perry Mason, obviously this Joan Harmon would be one of the people you might expect to pop up at the end and admit that she was the malefactor all along. But they obviously have taken a hard look at her. They may have jumped to the conclusion that he did it because he's a former Army Ranger, but there's something about her when they investigated her. Back 5 years ago when this happened, people ran around with their cell phones even then, and you could trace where people went with their cell phones. They must have something that totally exonerates her, because I agree with your other guest that she seems like she might be a suspect, but how does she plant those shell casings? She doesn't have access to his gun in his safe after their marriage. She's not running around with shell casings all of that time. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it seems very difficult that she would have been the one to frame him. Somehow, if they have a framing theory, it has to be Phillips's son and the aunt in some way. And the idea that she's also involved in it, that's just too complicated. Conspiracies are hard to pull off with lots of people.
Right, that's always reasonable doubt. In fact, we're going to talk about that in our Talk Back segment. Today's question: